Mr. Chairman, I think most people will be surprised when they reflect on the year under review and ask, what is the most significant thing that the Department of Conservation did this year, and find out that it wasn't anything to do with conservation. It was actually the antithesis of conservation. It was in mining in inappropriate areas. The government, through the Ministry of Conservation and through the Ministry of Economic Development this last year, have been investigating opening up more of the conservation estate to mining. Now, I'm not one who says that mining is always wrong. I wear a gold ring, I drive a metal car. There is a place for mining. It would be hypocritical for us to say that there isn't. And indeed, there can be times when it is appropriate to mine parts of the land which is in the conservation estate. It happens not infrequently already. But just as it can be appropriate to mine in some parts of the conservation estate, it is completely inappropriate to mine in some other parts of the conservation estate. And most notable of the areas that ought not to be mined are, of course, national parks. And it's many, many years since anyone in New Zealand thought that it was sensible to mine in national parks. Until that is, the last Minister of Conservation, Tim Grosser, got into the portfolio. Now, what was his first act as Minister of Conservation? His first act within days of the election was to amend the boundaries of the Otiaki Conservation Park that was being created to exclude an area where there is a lignite resource. We're not talking gold, we're not talking copper, we're not talking diamonds, we're talking brown coal. And he altered the boundaries of a conservation park so as to exclude that area from it. Then the next thing that the government did was to start this so-called stocktake of mineral resources in the conservation estate and look at how they could free up mining in other parts of the conservation estate. Now, there are some parts of the conservation estate that are listed in Schedule 4 of the Conservation Act where mining is prohibited. They are largely national parks. Other than the national parks, most conservation areas mining is not prohibited. It's not prohibited. There are some notable exceptions to that. I think the most notable to most people is the Coromandel. You know, the Coromandel is an area that's close to Auckland. Auckland has got a third of the population. It hasn't got its fair share of national parks. The conservation areas close to Auckland, like in the Coromandel area, really do need protection. And that's why some years ago this Parliament decided that an area north of what's called the Green Line in the Coromandel should not be open for mining. This government is reconsidering that. But having done that, it sort of found themselves in a bit of a muddle, and so they've tried to obfuscate and say, well, it's nothing different to what the Labour government did. Look at what happened in Paparoa National Park. Right. And they say that the mining by Pike River Coal Mine adjacent to the park is an instance of mining on the national park. Of course, when you look at the detail, they're wrong, because the only thing that happens in the national park is 4 emergency exits for the miners. 4 emergency exits, each of which is a diameter of 1.5 metres. So, you know, Mr. Key sort of saying that was a precedent for mining in national parks is not correct. It is a precedent for mining in non-national park conservation areas, and that can be appropriate if they're not Schedule 4 listed lands. But the government's been caught misrepresenting that. What else are they up to? Well, of course, the minister's already overseen taking away ministerial responsibility in respect of decisions for developments in the marine space. And there were problems with how that discretion, or the timing in which that discretion could be exercised. And I think on both sides of the House we would have been very happy to tidy up the timing of it so that people hadn't spent their money on their resource management applications before the minister's decision was taken. But that's the law as it stands. That could have been tidied up, but instead they removed any political accountability in respect of decisions that there ought to be ministerial accountability for, because the minister is the guardian of public spaces on behalf of the public, and the minister ought to be willing to be judged on the basis of her or his, in the case of the predecessor, Mr. Grosser's decisions. Instead, we see that the government's trying to avoid political responsibility by taking lands out of Schedule 4 and making it easier for them to develop those areas. I think that is wrong. I think it's consistent with what the government's doing in terms of putting assets of the Auckland City away from the away from the direct control of elected councillors, and it is wrong, sir.
I call Nicky Wagner.